Before we get started, I'd like to say a few words about where we are. Today we're broadcasting from Stanford University in the heart of Silicon Valley. Since World War II, Stanford has encouraged its faculty and students to develop new technologies and turn them into great companies. Welcome to my video blog series on Ask a Silicon Valley Lawyer. I'm Louis Lowe, the founder of L2 Counsel, and I'm a corporate lawyer, and I help startups get formed, funded, financed, scaled for growth, bought and sold, and I love what I do. Today we're going to talk about running an effective board of directors meeting. Once you raise your first round of professional money, certainly with a venture capital firm, your board of directors process suddenly is going to become formalized. What might have been done around the kitchen table with your co-founders now is going to need to be significantly buttressed with structure and a process to help your company grow from where you are to the next level. A board of directors meeting is a place to build productive and lasting relationships between founders and professional directors over time. People generally look forward to them. There are really times where people can take stock of where you are and where you're headed. So there's something to look forward to. A word on cadence and frequency of these meetings. Many times a venture capital firm will want to have more boards of director meetings, and I think in every company the circumstances are going to be different, but what I think is sometimes harmful is having so many meetings that you're constantly planning for the next meeting, and suddenly the board of directors is in the weeds and operating your company. You don't want it, but you'll know when it's right. So generally, I think a board should meet quarterly rather than monthly. Because I think a quarterly is really a long enough period that you can really show results and you're not spending your life preparing for a board meeting. In terms of how lengthy they are in the cadence, I think that trying to keep people together for more than 3 hours and keep their attention is challenging. And if you try and have an all-day session, you're going to find that people are on their phones or looking at their email, and their attention span is lost and it becomes unproductive. Obviously, preparing for an all-day meeting could take you weeks, and so I really recommend keeping them to as short a time period as needed to cover the subject matters you have, and certainly not to avoid making them longer than 3 hours. So those are my thoughts on cadence and frequency. Directors are very busy people. It's important to get on their calendars at least a quarter ahead of time, and ideally to set board meetings for an entire year in December of the prior year or as early as you can, so that you're sure to have the key people that you need in the meeting, which are not only your directors, but probably the key members of your executive team. So that's a pro tip for you. The next topic I wanted to hit was how to present to your board. Directors are going to expect to see a PowerPoint template. Ideally, it's going to be the same template covered quarter to quarter, so that you've set an expectation of what you're reporting on. And before your very first board meeting, you probably want to sit down with your directors and make sure that they're okay with the template that you're going to use. Different investors have different thoughts about that. I'm going to share with you my own thoughts about what should be in your PowerPoint and how you deliver your quarterly reports to your board members. So I think the very first slide in any board meeting deck ought to be what were the highlights and lowlights of the quarter. You really want to set the tone that you're positive and you're leading the company at the same time as you're being very candid about how the company is performing. So it's great to show achievements, and it's also important to show your board here are the things where we're really suffering or we're challenged. Maybe we lost a customer, the customer satisfaction scores were low, and so we're trying to build them up. Whatever it is, maybe it's turnover. So highlights and lowlights. The next slide typically would be a CEO focus slide. So these are the things that the CEO personally spent time on during the period, and what were the results. Maybe you're a life science company and the CEO was focused on product development or R&D. Maybe you're more in the scaling phase of your company's growth, and it's more about sales and marketing, and the CEO is going to tell the board about the various accounts and customers that she or he visited. So CEO overview slide would be number 2. Now, if you're just a new Series A company, you've just gotten your first round of external capital, most likely you're more in the lower phases of the hockey stick, as we say, and you're probably going to be focusing next on research and development or product development, sort of what's happening in the development of what it is that you're building, your technology or your product. So R&D could be product development, something like that. Next slide would probably go to sales and marketing. If you've raised money from a venture capital firm, you probably have some revenue, maybe not. If you do, this would be the place to go talk about sales and marketing and what you're doing to develop a pipeline of new customers and how they're moving through the funnel. After that, I often see people reporting on customer satisfaction. This is a really critical part of any company's growth, is making sure that they're getting feedback from their customers about how they're experiencing the product and the service that they're getting, and how the company is responding to that feedback to make the product better and the service better. Next, I think that depending on the stage of growth that you're at, and if you're a Series A company, I think you're likely in growth mode, and you're going to want to report on human resources and new hires, headcount, any HR issues that are percolating. You probably have an HR slide. Next, you might have a slide about the equity or the employee equity pool, any new grants, what the strike price is. Remember that if you're ever doing equity grants, you would like to try and have a valid 409A independent third-party valuation, establishing what the exercise price should be for tax reasons. And then you might have a slide on any legal matters, if there are any, whether it's new patents filed or the resolution of disputes that you had referenced in the prior quarter. And then I think would be appropriate to go have the finance person present a financial overview. In the financial overview, the board really is going to want to see whether the revenues are trending as they were forecasted, and whether the costs are being incurred on the schedule that had been budgeted, and they want to see that when the company is going to be cash out. So it's very important that if you promise that your Series A money is going to last you 2 years, that you're producing a financial overview every quarter or every month that shows that you are tracking to that timeline. It's critical for the board to know when you're going to be cash out, and if you're spending money much faster than you budgeted and revenues are coming in at a much slower pace, the board needs to know, and so that they can react and think about whether additional capital is needed. Finally, I think it's really helpful to have a working session on one particular topic that you can dive into a little bit more deeply, perhaps with one of the members of the executive staff, or even a layer lower, somebody who's a really good engineer, giving a report to the board on some aspect of the product that's really important for its growth. So some sort of a working session, probably not more than 30 minutes, deeper dive into something that you wouldn't do every quarter. Finally, I think it's really good to wrap up with an executive session where the board can meet outside the presence of management and then give some feedback to the management afterwards. A word on who should attend board meetings. I think it's really important for a management team to show their depth and breadth by having them all there, at least for the non-confidential portions of the meeting. And I think it's important for your team to feel like they have a voice, and it motivates them to come before the board. And I really like having somebody that would not normally be in a board meeting come and present for 10, 15 minutes every quarter. Really allows the board to see the type of team that you're building and the excellence and quality that they have. And it's very motivating for them too. So we've talked about candor being a key ingredient of success for your board. One way to make sure that the board is well prepared for the meeting is to make sure they're not surprised. Make sure that board pack goes out a week in advance. And if you can't get it out a week in advance because that's too ambitious, make sure it's out at least 2 or 3 days before. The worst thing you can do is give a board deck right at the meeting. They haven't read it and they're surprised by the contents. I like to recommend to my CEOs that they try and schedule one-on-one short 5-minute update calls frequently throughout the quarter and probably a week before a board meeting so that they can vet and air out preview any issues that the directors will see in the deck. And again, so that they're not surprised, they've had a chance to think about the issues involved and provide good feedback. And they'll thank you that you've given them that preparation and that you've allowed them the respect and the space to think about how to respond. So you're preparing for your first board meeting. I want to tell you how it's different than an employee meeting. In an employee meeting, you're really evangelizing, you're inspiring, you're helping your employees feel good. The tone in a board meeting is going to be different. While you still want to be positive, and you still want to be inspirational, and you want to show the board somebody on the team that's an evangelizer, you also want to set a tone that's very, very candid. Board members really want to feel like they understand what's happening, and it helps them make good decisions when they're well prepared. Candor is the best advice I can give you. As with all things, the follow-up is really important. Somebody in the board should be keeping a list of items that the board has asked for follow-up or additional information on so that you're able to get back to the board within a week. I like to try and circulate that list of follow-up items in the 24 hours after a board meeting so that if something was left off, a director has a chance to say, hey, I also mentioned that I wanted fill in the blank. So following up is very important. A word on legal formalities. It's really helpful if you have your outside counsel in the room for board meetings. Most outside counsel will sit in board meetings for a Series A company for free to make sure that they're giving the best advice and they're hearing what's going on with the company and they're able to make sure that nothing is going on that will cause problems for the company later. So an example might be if you're going to be doing equity grants, there's a very specific process that has to be followed in order to preserve the 409A safe harbor under the Internal Revenue Code. That's one example that to make sure that if option grants are being granted, that they were approved by the board. That's another item that's important. Having legal counsel there is important. They should be taking notes and circulating drafts of the minutes that will hopefully have adopted whatever resolutions were proposed at the meeting. Think of your board of directors process as really a way to build relationships with your investors and your fellow members of your management team. I like to have a dinner, an informal dinner the night before or the night after a board meeting so that people can get together in a social setting, have a meal together, get to know each other on a more informal basis, and where trust can be built. I think that's a really helpful thing to have a board dinner night before or night after a meeting. Some people will do a board meeting in the morning and finish with lunch, and I find that people are very busy and they run out seconds after the meeting, and you don't really have that opportunity to build relationships and break bread and have a meal together. So scheduling that in advance is really helpful. And again, underscoring the importance of scheduling these meetings far enough in advance. If anybody's traveling to your meeting, they're going to need to take into account the time of the board dinner into their travel schedule to make sure that they're there. So that's what I wanted to tell you about running an effective board. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through my website at L2Counsel.com. I look forward to any comments that you have in the thread down below or any suggestions as to topics that we can cover in the future. Thanks for joining Ask a Silicon Valley Lawyer. I'm Louis Lehot. Have a great day.